never thought my life would change so much after this incident. So, I recommend you listen to my story to the end, subscribe to the channel, and like it. That night, I heard the knock. I thought for a second it was the storm itself trying to break down my door. The rain was hammering the roof, the wind howling through the trees, and then came that sharp, desperate sound. 3 knocks. Quick, uneven, almost frightened. When I opened the door, she stood there soaked, trembling. Her red hair plastered to her face, eyes wide as if she'd just run from something she couldn't name. And before I could even speak, she whispered, "Stay with me tonight. My name is Lucas Hayes. I'm 38 years old. And if I'm being honest, I never thought life could surprise me anymore. After the divorce 3 years ago, my days fell into a rhythm. Work, groceries, a beer on the couch, maybe some baseball on TV. I told myself I was fine with it, that stability was better than the chaos I used to know. And most nights it was true. But when I saw her standing there in the storm, I knew that lie was about to fall apart. She had moved into the house across the street just a few months earlier. I'd noticed her, of course. Everyone had a young woman, mid-20s, with that kind of presence you couldn't ignore. She always carried herself like she had somewhere important to be. But her smile was soft, almost shy whenever our paths crossed at the mailbox or in the driveway. We exchanged a few polite words, nothing more. I never expected anything beyond that. That evening, though, the power had gone out across the block. The whole street was dark except for the occasional flash of lightning. She told me her house felt unbearable, too empty, too quiet, and I understood more than I let on. Loneliness has a sound, and in a storm it grows louder. I offered her a towel, some tea. We sat in my living room, the only light coming from 2 candles on the coffee table. She kept glancing at the windows, flinching each time thunder cracked. Then she laughed, nervous but genuine, and said, "I hate storms, always have. But somehow sitting here, it feels less terrifying." There was something about the way she said it that made me forget the age gap, the neighbors who might be watching, the gossip that would surely follow. For a moment, it was just 2 people trapped in the same storm trying to find warmth. I asked her about her life, what had brought her here. She hesitated, then told me she'd left behind a long relationship that had drained her spirit. "I wanted a fresh start," she said, staring into her cup. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere I could breathe again." Her voice cracked a little, and I felt a pull in my chest I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't romantic then, not yet. It was something simpler. Recognition. The look in her eyes mirrored the one I saw in my own reflection too many nights. The weight of choices, the silence of empty rooms, the hunger for something real. The storm outside raged for hours, but inside we found an unexpected calm. I told her about my failed marriage, about how I'd stopped believing in second chances. She listened, really listened, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes steady on mine. At some point, the power flickered back on, but neither of us moved to turn off the candles. We just sat there, caught in the quiet, the storm fading to a distant rumble. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. The rain had slowed, just a drizzle now. She looked back at me, her hair still damp, her expression unreadable. And then, almost in a whisper, she said again, "Stay with me tonight." I didn't answer right away. My heart pounded in my chest, torn between caution and the undeniable pull of the moment. I knew that whatever choice I made would change the course of both our lives. And that's how it began. The night a storm brought her to my door and shattered the walls I had built around myself. The morning after the storm, everything felt sharper, as if the world had been washed clean. The streets glistened, branches lay scattered on the sidewalks, and neighbors came out to inspect the damage. I tried to act as if nothing unusual had happened, as if the night before hadn't left my chest tight with questions. But it wasn't that simple. She lingered in my thoughts like the echo of thunder, impossible to ignore. I caught myself replaying the sound of her voice, the way she whispered those words at my door, the way her eyes searched mine in the candle light. Her name was Ava Reynolds. Until then, I'd never said it more than once or twice. Morning, Ava Reynolds. Mail came for you, Ava Reynolds. But after that night, even the syllables carried weight. I didn't see her that morning. Instead, I saw Edith Parker, my 75-year-old neighbor, standing on her porch in her robe, holding a pair of binoculars like a general surveying enemy lines. She didn't even try to hide it. When our eyes met, she waved and shouted. I saw her leave your house last night quite late. Lucas Hayes. I muttered something about the storm, about helping out a neighbor, but her grin told me she wasn't buying a word. By afternoon, the whole block would know. And I could already imagine the whispers. For years, I'd been the quiet man who kept to himself. And now, suddenly, I was the subject of the neighborhood's favorite pastime. Speculation. At work, it wasn't much better. My colleague Tom leaned across his desk and smirked. So, you and the new neighbor, huh? Isn't she, what, 27? That makes you what? Old enough to be her mentor. His laugh echoed down the hallway, and I felt the sting, even if I pretended not to care. That evening, I saw Ava Reynolds again. She was in her driveway unloading groceries from her car. The sun was low, painting the world gold. I walked over, offered to help, and she smiled. An easy, grateful smile that pushed away every doubt for a moment. Thanks, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I was worried you'd regret letting me in last night. Regret? I shook my head. Not even for a second. Her eyes softened, but there was something behind them. A shadow of uncertainty, maybe even fear. She didn't speak of it, and I didn't press. Instead, we carried the bags inside. And for the first time, I stepped into her house. It was modest, still half empty, as if she hadn't fully decided to belong there yet. Boxes stacked in the corners. A few framed photos turned face down. She caught me noticing and said quietly, I don't unpack until I'm sure I'm staying. We shared tea again, this time in her kitchen. The storm had left her shaken, she admitted. But it wasn't just the thunder. It reminded me of nights I'd rather forget, she said, her fingers tightening around the mug. I wanted to ask, but I held back. She would tell me in her own time. When I left her house, Edith Parker was once again on her porch, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. She called out, 2 in 2 days, Lucas Hayes. Careful now. People might think you're falling in love. Ava Reynolds laughed softly, but I felt my face burn. Walking home, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. I didn't care about the gossip, the raised eyebrows, or the jokes at work. What mattered was the way she looked at me. As if I wasn't just some man weighed down by past mistakes, but someone worth trusting again. And that scared me more than any storm ever could. I wasn't expecting him. Nobody warned me. No whisper from Edith Parker. No rumor at work. He just appeared one Saturday afternoon, leaning against a sleek black car in Ava Reynolds' driveway as if he owned the place. I was raking leaves when I saw them. Ava Reynolds stood a few feet away from him, her arms crossed, her body stiff. He was taller than me, maybe by an inch, well-built with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you can get away with almost anything. And when he turned his head, the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. His name was Evan Carter. I learned that later, but I didn't need an introduction to understand who he was. He carried himself like a man who believed Ava Reynolds belonged to him. I tried to keep working, tried to pretend I wasn't listening, but his voice carried across the yard. You really think you can start over here with him? He didn't bother lowering his tone. Didn't care who heard. Ava Reynolds' voice was firmer than I'd ever heard it. I told you it's over, Evan Carter. You don't get to decide where I live or who I talk to. He laughed sharp and dismissive. Then his eyes slid back to me. This is a joke. He's twice your age. I felt heat rush to my face, but I didn't move. I kept my hands tight on the rake, afraid that if I let go, I might walk over and do something I'd regret. Ava Reynolds noticed. She turned her head just slightly, her eyes finding mine, steady and unflinching. It wasn't embarrassment in her gaze. It was a plea. Don't give him the satisfaction. So I didn't. I finished my work, dragged the leaves into a pile, and walked inside without a word. But the silence burned worse than any insult. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of beer, staring at the wall. My phone buzzed. It was Michael, my oldest friend. He knew me too well. I heard the storm across the street wasn't weather this time, he said with a chuckle. I told him everything about Evan Carter, about the way Ava Reynolds looked at me, about the knot in my chest I couldn't untangle. Michael listened, then said, "You've been alone too long, Dan. Don't let some kid scare you off. If she's choosing you, that's all that matters." But was she choosing me? That question gnawed at me. Ava Reynolds hadn't come by after Evan Carter left. No knock on the door, no text, nothing. Just silence. 2 days later, we crossed paths by chance outside the grocery store. She was carrying a paper bag, hair tied back, looking exhausted. When she saw me, she stopped. "I'm sorry about the other day," she said softly. "He shouldn't have spoken to you like that." "You don't owe me an apology," I told her. "But you do owe yourself an answer. Is he really gone?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Then she just shook her head almost imperceptibly and whispered, "I'm trying." It wasn't enough. It wasn't what I wanted to hear. But the way her voice cracked, the way her eyes glistened, told me she was fighting a battle I couldn't yet understand. As we stood there in the parking lot, bags of groceries between us, I realized something I hadn't admitted until then. I was already too far in. Whatever this was, whatever it became, I wasn't walking away, and that terrified me more than Evan Carter ever could. The rain returned a week later, heavier than before. I was closing the blinds when I saw her across the street, standing on her porch, her shoulders tense as if the storm had singled her out. For a moment, I thought she'd go back inside, but instead, she walked straight toward my house. No umbrella, no jacket, just her, soaked and trembling. By the time I opened the door, she was already halfway up the steps. Her hair clung to her face, her denim jacket darkened with water, and her eyes looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "Evan Carter came back again," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "He doesn't listen. He doesn't stop." I stepped aside, letting her in, but she shook her head. "I don't want to hide. I needed to see you." We ended up on the porch, both of us getting drenched as the storm raged. She paced a little, her hands twisting nervously. Then she stopped in front of me. "Do you know why I came to your door that first night?" I swallowed hard, rain dripping down my face. "Because of the storm?" She shook her head. "Because you were the only person on the street who looked at me like I wasn't broken. Everyone else sees a young woman with a messy past. You see me." Her words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. I told myself I was just being neighborly, that I was helping someone in need. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, from the moment she'd stood in my doorway, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I took a step closer. "Ava Reynolds, I don't care what anyone else says. I don't care about the gossip or the jokes. I care about you." She looked up at me, rain streaking her cheeks, mixing with tears she wasn't trying to hide. Slowly, carefully, she reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but they tightened around mine as if holding on to something she didn't want to lose. "You make me feel safe," she whispered. "Not because you protect me from him, but because when I'm with you, I can breathe." The thunder rolled overhead, but I barely noticed. My free hand lifted almost without thinking, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing for a heartbeat before meeting mine again. I wanted to kiss her. God, I wanted to, but instead I pulled her into an embrace, holding her against me as the storm poured down. Her body trembled against mine, not just from the cold, but from everything she had been carrying alone. We stood there like that for what felt like forever. Two people in the rain, finding warmth in each other when the world outside offered none. When we finally pulled apart, she smiled softly, almost shyly, and said, "You're the first person I've trusted in a long time." I didn't know what to say. My chest ached with something I hadn't felt since before my marriage fell apart. Hope. But as much as I wanted to believe the storm had washed everything clean, I knew it wasn't over. Evan Carter was still out there, and people like him don't disappear quietly. As Ava Reynolds left that night, glancing back at me from her porch with a look that said more than words ever could, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just her neighbor anymore. I was becoming the reason she stayed. And if I lost her, it wouldn't just break her. It would break me too. The storm may have passed, but inside me it hadn't. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be Ava Reynolds telling me Evan Carter had shown up again. Every sound outside my window at night made me tense. And still, I couldn't stay away from her. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and the street lights began to glow, she came to my door again. This time, there was no storm, no excuse, only her. She looked more determined than I'd ever seen her, but her eyes carried a weight that unsettled me. "He went to my parents," she said quietly. "Told them I was throwing my life away, that you're too old for me, that you're using me to feel young again." She paused, her hands trembling. They believed him. Anger surged through me. Not at her parents. They didn't know me. Evan Carter for poisoning everything. For trying to chain her to the past. "Ava Reynolds, listen," I said, my voice rough. "Do you believe him?" Her eyes met mine, wet but steady. "No, but it doesn't matter what I believe if the world is against us." I stepped closer, my chest tight. "Then let them be against us. Let the neighbors whisper. Let him shout. Let your parents judge me. I don't care. All I care about is whether you're still here." She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, her lips trembling, her breath uneven. And then in the smallest voice she said, "I am." Something inside me broke open. I reached for her hand, pulled her into my arms, and for the first time, I kissed her. It wasn't desperate. It was certain, like everything I hadn't dared to say until now, finally found a voice. She kissed me back, her body pressed to mine, and I knew in that moment there was no turning back. But even as we held each other, I knew the fight wasn't over. Evan Carter wasn't the kind of man to walk away. The gossip wouldn't stop overnight. The looks at the grocery store, the smirks at work, Edith Parker's never-ending commentary, they'd all be part of our reality. Later, when she finally pulled away, she rested her forehead against mine and whispered the same words she'd said that first night in the storm. "Stay with me tonight." This time, there was no hesitation, no second guessing. I stayed. We sat together in her half-furnished living room, candles flickering on the counter, the world outside reduced to silence. She talked about her dreams, finishing school, traveling, maybe opening a small shop one day. I told her about mine, the ones I buried under routine and regret. For hours, we shared pieces of ourselves that no one else had touched. When dawn broke, soft lights spilling through her windows, I realized something I hadn't dared to before. I wasn't just falling for her. I already had. And yes, the battle still waited. Evan Carter would try again. The world would keep questioning us. Maybe even we would doubt ourselves. But as I watched Ava Reynolds asleep on the couch beside me, her head resting on my shoulder, I understood the truth. The night she knocked on my door, I thought she needed me. But the truth was, I needed her even more. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in the shadow of what I'd lost. I was living for what I'd